Hi, I'm Sara. This is my first video that I'm filming without my sister, so I'm feeling a little bit lonely and don't really know who to talk to, but I'm gonna go ahead and get started. And today I'm gonna talk about some YA books that I think are underrated. I've got a range going, so my kind of arbitrary cutoff for what I consider to be underrated was less than 50,000 ratings on Goodreads. So pretty much Twilight has like 1 million. Really, the big popular YA books have ratings kind of in the hundreds of thousands. So that was kind of my cutoff. So some of these are more well known than others. I've got everything from 45,000 ratings on Goodreads all the way down to 618. So at least one book that probably nobody else has ever heard of, except for my sister. If you're watching this, I miss you. And for anyone that's wondering, yes, I am no longer a young adult. I'm a ways away from being a young adult. I'm fully adult. But I still like reading YA once in a while. And I think a lot of people do. And I think there's some good reasons for it. A lot of YA books tend to be a little faster paced. They tend to be a little shorter if you're looking for a quicker read. You're not worried about bills. Everything is fresh and new. It's just it's a fun time in life to go back and visit now that I am safely away and never have to worry about being a teenager again. So the first book I'm going to talk about is The Adoration of Jenna Fox. So this is an older one. This is from 2008. This is something that I read when I was, I guess it would have been 19, so still in that young adult range. This is the most popular of the ones that I'm going to be talking about. And it's got a lot of sci-fi futuristic elements to it. And it ends up being almost more of a philosophical question. It's hard to describe without giving away too much of the plot and the reveal. Although I think, especially reading back where we are now in the world, it would be pretty obvious early on what was actually happening. For me, what I remember more about this book is less of like an emotional attachment to it, attachment to the main character or the central romance or anything like that. And I remember more about the questions that this book actually gets around to asking. It dives deep into, with medical advancements, how far can we go? How far is too far? Where should the cutoffs be? What is morally right and what is wrong? And that is the part that I have really remembered about this for years. It's a good read, but I think more than anything, it's an important book. It asks really good questions, and I think even adults would appreciate it for that if you are an adult. Even though it's 12 years old now, I think it's still very relevant and topical, and I need to go back and read it myself. And there's a sequel. I didn't really get into the sequel at all. I don't think I ever actually read all of it. But the original novel itself is very strong, I think, in its central concept and its backbones and just the questions it asks about what we should do as a society. So my second book, and I'm going to be going in order of most popular on Goodreads to least popular, is called Eliza and Her Monsters. And this is a book about a girl who has an extremely successful webcomic. And no one knows it's her other than her immediate family, but it is popular to the point of everybody in her real life knows about it and no one knows it's her. And this is all compounded by the fact that she's such this big presence online, but in real life she has some very real social anxiety issues. And that's what I recommend this book for. It's a very endearing read. I enjoyed it a lot. I loved reading it. I loved Eliza and the love interest in the book, but I really loved the way it allowed me to get inside the head of someone with social anxiety. Both Eliza and her love interest have some pretty big issues there. And I like that they don't just get resolved by love. They meet each other, they become very affectionate towards each other, but it doesn't solve all of their problems. It's just kind of a different experience for novels. I can't think of a lot of other books that really deal with someone with issues that I think are handled as well. One other example might be Turtles All the Way Down by John Green. That is a much more popular book, so not really relevant to this video, but another thing I really enjoyed about this book was her parents and the relationship between Eliza and her parents. I think when you read a lot of young adult books, as an adult, you kind of end up siding with the parents because you know, you're looking back at it and you're like, oh yes, this child is completely unreasonable. These poor adults, why is she doing this to them? And that's not the case at all in this book. And I think it's kind of interesting to see kind of the flawed parents from this perspective. They're not abusive, they're not bad people. They just kind of had a child that wasn't what they were expecting. It kind of shows that they're not perfect in how they handle this. But what they think is best is just very different from what would actually be right for Eliza. And it's interesting to see, that confrontation between her and her parents. Because, again, no one's a bad person here, but you see the parents making these bad parenting decisions, even though they're good people that are trying to be good parents. Next up on my list is a book called The Earth, My Butt, and Other Big Round Things. This one came out in 2003, so this was something I actually did read when I was, I think, the same age as the main character. This is a book that ends up on a lot of banned book lists, or at least it did back when it first came out, because it deals very head-on with some very uncomfortable issues. Virginia is the main character, and she is a 15-year-old girl that is overweight and feels like she lives in the shadow of the rest of her family that's entirely skinny and just seems to have more in common with each other than any of them do with her. And everyone else in her family just seems perfect and put together at all times, and she kind of feels like she's the outlier in her own family. And all this is kind of brought to a head when her brother commits an act of date rape. Virginia's brother was kind of her perfect idol. She always really looked up to him, and him doing this just shatters her and just brings to the surface all of her own issues and all of the issues within her family. This book, again, like I said, it was written in 2003, and when you look back at it with your 2020 goggles, there are some problems with it, some of which I think are cleared up in the more recent sequel. I imagine was kind of a reflection of the author looking back and changing her mind on how this book should have ended. But when I was 14, 15, I loved this. I loved Virginia. I loved how she does end up just, getting her groove back and taking charge of her own life, deciding what's important to her versus what's important to her family. And I loved how raw and honest it was in her grief about this whole thing that happened. The next book that I'd like to recommend is actually a series. The first book is called Blue is for Nightmares, and it came out in 2003. And this series was my everything when I was a teenager. It focuses on a 16-year-old girl, Stacy, who is away at a boarding school. I love boarding schools. They're so fun for novels because you finally have an excuse for the absent parents. Once you take everyone away and put them in a boarding school, it kind of justifies that a little more and makes the novel sometimes read a little easier. And again, that was nothing like my life. My parents were always there. Often a little more than I would have liked them to be in my teenage years. In Blue is for Nightmares, Stacy is actually a witch. And this is a take on magic and being a witch that I have not seen done in another book. The novel starts off with Stacy having nightmares about her best friend and roommate Drea being kidnapped. Are these dreams real? Who's the kidnapper? Because of course the dreams are always just vague enough that she can't figure it out until the last possible minute. Most of the book's taken up with Stacy and her friends trying to figure out who the kidnapper is and to protect Drea. And I just love this. I love most of the characters. Her group of friends is a little wacky. But there's 4 of these books and a graphic novel, and I absolutely loved them when I was younger, and I've never known anyone else that read them. So if you're looking for that boarding school mystery with a hint of magic and a hint of a love triangle, this is for you. My next book's called Starry Eyes, and this one came out very recently in 2018. And this is just kind of a fun camping novel. I don't quite know how to describe it. The 2 main characters are a boy and a girl who have always lived next door or across the street from each other, and they were best friends all through their childhood until last year when something happened, and now they are enemies, sworn enemies, but with a healthy dose of sexual tension underneath, And I love that trope. I do. It's definitely a trope, and I love it. My only complaint for this would be that I don't think they're particularly convincing as enemies. The book takes place from the girl Zori's perspective, so we know she doesn't truly hate Lennon, the male protagonist. He honestly never even acts like he hates her, so I don't know why she ever thinks he does. But anyway, they end up going on a camping trip with some mutual friends. Zori doesn't realize Lennon's gonna be there, so she agrees to go. And then they end up getting stranded alone together in the wilderness, and they have to hike their way back together. This book made me want to go camping. I haven't been camping in like 10 years and I didn't like it that much when I did it, but when I was reading this book, I was like, yeah, maybe I want to go camping. It's pretty long for a YA book. It takes its time, which I appreciate. I really enjoyed reading it. I would recommend this book to anyone that's looking for a good YA, but also feels like maybe they want to go camping recently, but can't because of coronavirus or, you know, an overwhelming fear of spiders, such as myself. All right, next up we have a very recent one. This is from 2019. This one is called The Last True Poets of the Sea. And this is about a girl who is going away for the summer. There's some very serious family issues going on in her life, and she's decided to go away for the summer and hang out with her uncle, just kind of take a step back from her big, busy life in New York City and get a summer job, just kind of be a teenager and I guess kind of let herself heal from everything that's been going on. And of course, once she does, she ends up kind of stumbling into a 100-year-old family mystery and also landing up smack dab in the middle of one of my favorite love triangles that I think I've read in young adult literature. It was a true love triangle in every sense of the word. This was one of my favorite young adult books that I've read in a long time. Everything really came together. This would probably be my top recommendation out of all the books. Like if somebody asked me to pick one YA book that I wanted to recommend, depending on the person, this would likely be it. All right, so next I would actually like to recommend two books by an author called Christopher Pike that I read a lot when I was a teenager. The older one is called Bury Me Deep. And this is a book about a girl who is on a trip to Hawaii with some friends when she has kind of a dream or hallucination on the airplane there about a boy that's gone missing. This is a weird one that I liked a lot because it deals a lot with scuba diving. I would never scuba dive. I'm not good at swimming. I'm not like a water person. I like to float in a boat on top of the water, but no part of me has any desire to go underneath the water. But maybe that's why I liked this book, because it was a way for me to kind of get to experience that. And it was also a murder mystery and I just really liked it. But I would recommend that one if you've never read anything by Christopher Pike, or if maybe the horror mystery isn't really your genre. But if you are into that type of thing, or if you've read other Christopher Pike books and you want something weirder, then I would recommend The Starlight Crystal. It is hard to explain The Starlight Crystal. It is probably one of the weirdest books I have ever read, and it has stayed with me ever since I read it back when I was, I don't even, probably like 15, not sure. Bury Me Deep is kind of a straight up whodunit murder mystery with a side of the paranormal to it. The Starlight Crystal is a sci-fi, fantasy, philosophy jumble of craziness. You will have no idea what's going on. You will have no idea where this story is going, and I can pretty much guarantee you will never guess what is coming next. And at the same time, everything just comes together at the end, and it just all makes sense, and it will just stay with you for a long time. Christopher Pike, I feel like he gets lumped in a lot with R.L. Stine or the Goosebumps books that were around at the same time, and I read both of those too. And Christopher Pike is just kind of in a different place than them. Christopher Pike's books tend to go in a way that you're not expecting. If you ever happen to see one of his books around, I would pick it up and give it a try if that sounds like something you're into. And if you do, the two that I most recommend from him were Bury Me Deep and The Starlight Crystal. And then my final book, and this one might be a mistake to put in here because I have not read this in a very long time, but this book is called Locked Inside. It was written back in 2000. It only has 618 ratings on Goodreads, so probably no one else has heard of this. It's about a girl named Marnie. Her mother was a famous singer. She puts all of her time into this online game, and she ends up being kidnapped and locked in a basement, and it's about her survival and her fight to stay alive. It's just really good. The way it ties in her online gaming identity with how she ends up coping and dealing with this kidnapping and trying to get herself out of it. It ties in very well. Her repressed kind of issues with her mother, kind of some discovery about who her mother was and what her mother's life was before she became a famous singer. It's 20 years old now, which makes me feel absolutely ancient. I still remember parts of it really well, which I think is often a mark of a good book. I'll have to go back and read it again, and I probably should have before recommending it in this video, because again, this book was written in 2000. Lord only knows what's going on, what happens in it that I've forgotten, but I really loved it, and I'm surprised it's so unknown, like that not many other people have read it or remember it. All right, thanks for tuning in, and see you next time.